formalities, can I just check you can all hear me? Yes? And the live stream has commenced. Thank you. For anyone new to these proceedings, my name is Kevin Gleeson. I'm the Planning Inspector appointed by the Secretary of State for Transport to hold this inquiry and make a recommendation to her. The Programme Officer is Helen Wilson. She is seated at the rear of the room. If you have any questions about the inquiry process, organisation or documentation, please speak to her in the first instance. So this is the 5th day of the inquiry. First, the usual reminders. Can mobile phones and other electronic devices be switched to silent, please? There are no fire alarm tests or drills today, so in the event of a fire alarm, please exit via the fire exits. These are to my right, further down on the right-hand side, and where you came in. Fire evacuation assembly point is located in the car park. Toilets are located in the entrance area as well, where you came in. As with day 1 of the inquiry, we'll aim to finish by 5 p.m. with a break of around an hour for lunch at 1 o'clock and a short mid-morning and mid-afternoon break. As with previous days, the inquiry has been live streamed and recorded. So today we're going to hear from Dr. David White, Adrian Worley, Roger Tipple, Chris Nicholson, the National Trust, Dr. Andrew Langley, and Peter Gower. As some participants may not have been at previous inquiry sessions, I will just repeat some of the guidance I provided previously. I'm looking to witnesses to assist me in my understanding of the case. In that light, I will emphasise that it is not helpful to me, and neither is it a good use of inquiry time, to hear the same point being made a number of times. If it is a good point, it won't gain any more strength or weight through repetition. Nor is it necessary to repeat points that have already been made in writing. Moreover, if, when it comes to your turn, someone has already said what you wanted to say, it's quite all right for you to say that you have nothing further to add. I have a few procedural issues to raise before we begin. Firstly, there have been a number of submissions made by parties since we adjourned on Friday afternoon. Further revisions have been made to the statutory instrument, with the latest version having reference IMQ/4E in the inquiry library. Mr. Reynolds, could you briefly outline the changes to the statutory instrument between the original and the revised version, please?
So actually I've not been involved in the revisions to that. As I understand it, Dr. Langley and my instructing solicitor have been engaged in that, and there is considerable agreement between them, save for 2 relatively small points, but I'll be briefed and able to address you if you wish on those revisions that have taken place more fully after the short adjournment, for example.
That's fine. And are you thinking that we are at the final version, or are there still possible changes to be made?
There is one draft, but I anticipate we'll reach that point very soon. Dr. Langley and I still to speak, but obviously it's not until after he's given his evidence because I don't want to distract him.
Yes.
Mainly wording, there is one key point is that a couple of statistics or a couple of percentages have been taken from 2 points down to 1 point, either rounded down or rounded up. And the majority is order of wording and some removal of some superfluous wording where Dr. Langley has been particularly helpful.
Thank you. I've seen the latest draft, so I see how the draft is evolving. No particular questions on that, but good to hear progress has been made. Thank you. The second issue I wanted to raise was I've received a further submission from Mr. Richard Sloan dated 25th of January. reference OBJ 83/2. Mr. Reynolds, have you seen this and do you want to respond?
Yes, I have seen that, so I'd like me to address you on that now.
Yes, please.
Okay. So the most recent submission was sought in order to obtain Mr. Slow's response to the UNESCO World Heritage Site map, given that his objection and written statement focused upon access to that site, and Mr. Slow's contention was that impediment of access to that site was a human rights issue. By his most recent submission, he does not engage with that map, but seeks to make new points he has not made before. He should not be permitted to do so. Mr. Slow also makes clear that he has not praised himself of much of the applicant's evidence, such that many of his arguments do not relate to the details of the application before you, sir. Contrary to what Mr. Slow says, it is for objectors to appraise themselves of the evidence. Mr. Slow makes a number of points about cross-examination or choosing not to cross-examine particular lay witnesses. Cross-examination is not a forum for argument, but its role is for addressing any central factual points of dispute that are of central importance to the application and the test which the inspector and the minister are applying. Otherwise, this inquiry would be unworkable, not least because there are many hundreds of written objections, which are of course not cross-examined. With that in mind, and given the force with which he chooses to make his submissions, it assists to go back and review Mr. Slow's previous submissions. This demonstrates that the only outstanding point he raised have been answered by those maps, and that his focus was very firmly on the UNESCO question alone. So Sarah, if you could turn up please for bundle 4, page 91, to look at the first objection from Mr. Slow. So, in going through this, I have in mind the point that Mr. Slow makes about choosing not to cross. Sorry, Sarah. The point that Mr. Slow makes about choosing not to cross-examine. Now, obviously, sorry, you may have already started to form your own view as to whether that correctly describes the procedure that applies to this inquiry. But it's in light of it, I think it is necessary that I respond by analysing the statement. Paragraph 1, he says, I have a home in Studlands and a regular user of the ferry. That is not disputed. Paragraphs 2 and 3 are arguments about the toll charges. There's no factual matter there, they're just arguments. So that's not the subject for cross-examination. Arguments 4 and 5 are submissions about what he thinks there should be in relation to a residence discount, not suitable subject for cross-examination. Paragraph 6, he does say a factual point that the toll has not been charged for almost 50 years. Now that is a factual point that's in dispute. However, I did not need to cross-examine on that, because as a matter of legal record, the 1990 SI, which applied through to 1991, levied a charge for the toll road. So the toll was not charged almost 50 years ago, but rather in the region of 34 years ago. I didn't need to debate that with Mr. Slow because it's a matter of legal record. Paragraph 7, it's not disputed that residents in Purbeck enjoy walks along the Heathland, etc. None of that's in dispute. It's not disputed, paragraph 8, that visitors are collected and dropped off from the ferry. Paragraph 9 is an assertion that the proposal is excessive. That's not the subject for cross-examination, it's an assertion, it's an argument for you. So. Then there are arguments, legal submissions at 10 and 11. Well, first of all, 10, about what powers the Secretary of State does or does not have. He, in terms of, the ferry company does or does not have in relation to restricting parking. He suggests that the different approaches should be taken. Again, that's all just argument, none of that's fact. Then he says at paragraphs 12 to 13.4, first of all, that the Secretary of State has the power to make various conditions. So that's legal interpretation, legal submissions about the breadth of the power of the Secretary of State. It's not a matter of cross-examination. And then he makes a series of arguments about what conditions he says should be imposed. None of that's factual, it's all argument. So sorry, I didn't mean to cross-examine him in any of that, because there were no factual points that were disputed, that weren't capable of being disproved by reference to legal record. So then if you go over the page to page 93, this is his written submission, further to his objection. It can be seen that paragraphs 1 through to 13 inclusive, so down to 13.4 are identical to the written objection. So all the points that I said apply. The only new aspect was paragraph 14. And this is the important one. It's necessary to read this because I say that when you analyse this, it's all about access to the UNESCO World Heritage Site. There's nothing which does not relate to it. So sorry, if you could just take a moment perhaps to read paragraphs 14 through to 14.2. So both 14.1 and 14.2 expressly relate to and relate solely to access to the UNESCO World Heritage Site. No other sites are mentioned there. And it can be understood why no other sites are mentioned, because at 14.1, Mr. Slowe specifically refers to Article 15 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, and he says that that links in with the status of the UNESCO World Heritage Site. Now that's a legal submission. I don't need to go there, but the point is that's why he's focusing on the UNESCO World Heritage Site. So the inquiry and Mr. Slowe have official UNESCO maps showing where the World Heritage Site is. It can be seen that the northernmost point of the UNESCO site goes up to near Old Harry Rocks and along the northernmost part of the small outcrop of land before stopping just east of Studland. So, whereas at 14.1, Mr. Slowe said that the UNESCO World Heritage Site starts at the South Ferry Terminal. It can be seen by reference to the US maps that the South Ferry Terminal is about 3 miles from the nearest point on the UNESCO site, or over an hour's walk for the able-bodied. Is around 1.3 miles from the southernmost point of the ferry road, where it intersects with Hardy's Road. And there are no footpaths from there onwards. Several other car parks are much closer, as can be appreciated by reference to the map. So the tollable part of the ferry road is plainly not an access point for the UNESCO World Heritage Site, which is what Mr. Keenan said in his evidence. Still less is an access point for those who cannot mobilise on foot. And it's worth noting how high Mr. Slowe put his submission at 14.1. because he described it in the last few words of that paragraph as being the only access road to the UNESCO World Heritage Site. So this is page 94, paragraph 14.1, the only access thereto, when in fact it is a number of miles away from the World Heritage Site. It can be seen that one has to go through Studland to get to it. So, the arguments that were advanced by Mr. Slow are factually wrong and can be shown to be factually wrong by reference to an authoritative source. Mr. Slow was sent that authoritative source to comment upon that. And rather than accepting that his submission that the World Heritage Site starts at South Ferry Terminal and Ferry Road is the only access site to the World Heritage Site, rather than accepting that they were wrong, he has instead launched into making a whole new number of points. And he should not be permitted to do so. Most of them are not relevant, most of them are comments on inappropriate comments on essentially my conduct, which are misplaced. But he also plainly seeks to almost abandon the UNESCO World Heritage Site point and instead want to make lots of other points. He should not be permitted to do so at this late stage, not least when the applicant's evidence has already been given. So sorry for being quite so long, but those are my submissions.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Okay, so moving on, the final point I wanted to raise initially was about the draft undertaking.
Yes.
This has been copied to the consortium, and there's now a reference on the library IMQ/7. Can I start with you, Mr. Dubin? Do you have any comments on the undertaking at all?
Not at the moment. I would propose to address it if there's any objection in the final submissions.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask Mr. Reynolds, will it be signed and dated before the end of the inquiry?
Yes, sir, it can be. And I can, of course, speak to Mr. Dubin privately, but it would be helpful, in particular, to hear from the consortium if they have any objections, given that there may be workable discussions to be had, rather than it being a simple question of the side letter not being sufficient. But that's something I'll take up with you.
Excuse me, can I just ask the reference on that was IMQ7?
That's correct.
It doesn't appear on
The revised
inquiry introduction.
should be on the revised list. I can check that with the inquiry officer, but I'll come back to you and clarify that.
Thank you.
Sorry, may I make a point as well? I haven't had a chance to look at this side letter at all, and I do have some concerns about it, which I'd also like to be able to discuss.
Yes, that's quite acceptable. It was a document, I think it was provided over the weekend and just been put onto the website. There was an opportunity to comment on it. Mr. Reynolds, one thing that I picked up on was there's no actual reference to the current application of legislation within that draft letter. And so that's something
Sorry, I
that's-
don't quite follow, sir.
the draft undertaking, it doesn't refer to the application itself
Yes.
or the legislation behind it. So I think that might be
Yes.
something that could be added.
So on the face of the document,
Yes.
maybe clearly,
Yeah.
yes. That makes sense.
But as I've said, welcome Mr. Dubin's comments on behalf of the consortium. There are a number of people speaking today and you'll have your own script ready for that. If you do have further comments or any comments on that undertaking, please provide those when you speak. And we'll come back to that at the end of the day if necessary. Finally, Mr. Reynolds, just in terms of documents being signed and dated, have the statements of common grounds been provided to the programme officers, signed and dated versions?
So I know that the copy of the bundle have been signed and dated by the applicant, but not by the consortium. I wasn't sure why that was. They have been agreed, but they haven't been signed. I can see Mr. Clark nodding that they have been agreed, but they haven't been signed. But we can arrange for the signing and uploading of the signed version.
Yes,
Yes, there's no problem with that, thank you.
thank you very much. So that's all I had initially. Before we begin hearing individuals, does anyone else wish to speak today who's not already indicated they wish to do so? No, thank you.
Sorry, can I just check that you've got me down there? My name is Gavin Oldham.
Yes.
You have got me. Thank you.
Yes. Yes, apologies, I missed your name off my list when I read it out, but you're definitely there.
Yeah, I've got it. Okay. Right.
So are there any other procedural or housekeeping matters anyone wishes to raise? No? So on that basis, let's continue the programme and we'll hear first from Dr. David White. Would you like to come up to the witness table, please?
So I've asked my wife to accompany me. I'm somewhat deaf, not terribly. I have an application on my mobile phone to control my hearing aids, which is why I have that there. And for me it's important that people speak well into the microphone.
Understood. That's fine, thank you.
Thank you, sir, for the opportunity to address the inquiry today. My objections, written and now, refer only to the road toll. My original objection and my then subsequent statement refer to the written evidence that was produced by the company and by the proofs of evidence. But since then, there was a rebuttal by the company on the 3rd of January, to which we weren't able to refer and make cases. And in the cross-examination, excuse me, of Mr. Keane in particular, there were fresh points raised, to which I would like to address today. And I understood from you when Dr. Langley and I asked if it was possible to produce new comments and evidence in relation to those two, that would be admissible, and I wish to do that. I wish to start by talking about the automatic number plate recognition ANPR cameras. The first use of those in written evidence came in the proof of evidence by Mr. Keane, and then subsequently on the second day of the inquiry, he indicated that vehicles moving on the road were not detected. He introduced the use of a mobile ANPR camera on a vehicle that moves along the roadway, and for me that was the first piece of evidence that was there. He indicated that vehicles moving on the road were not detected by that mobile camera, and that had the effect of excluding those visiting the businesses at the very end of the road to be not counted in the counts that were being made. He said explicitly that it's unlikely that the technology that we're going to be using will be able to pick up non-stationary vehicles. Thus, the mobile ANPR camera only detects parked vehicles. It is acting as a parking detector, not as a measure of road use in the sense of driving on the road and, for example, causing damage requiring maintenance. I'd like to address further some points as to whether the road toll is a levy for using the road or a parking fee in the common uses of those words. And I'd first like to make the point that it's not a road toll in the sense of driving on the road. As I understand the situation, the vehicle could drive up and down the road all day, exceeding the 30-minute stipulation and would not be charged, because there is no APNR detector to pick up moving vehicles. But it is a parking charge. And as an example of that, I would say that a vehicle could park for 2 successive nights beside the road, and in the middle day would not have driven on the road. However, it would be picked up by the mobile ANPR camera, identified as a parked car, and required to pay a toll. Further, the company's proposed pricing is by comparison to nearby parking charges. For example, there are 2 references in the submission by the company referring to car park charges close to beaches in Studland or Sandbanks. In order to justify that the company's processes could generate £50,000, which is one of the objectives of the road toll, they undertook spot checks between June and December. Actually, I think they may have done them later, but the evidence I saw was only until December, which could detect how much income they would generate from the road toll. But that only counted parked cars. It had no evidence. It didn't have any means of getting evidence for moving cars. I'd next like to make comments about the road repairs and maintenance. Over the period 2025 to 32, the ferry company's estimate of the cumulative cost of regular road repair and maintenance is just under £65,000. The number of vehicle journeys over that period is 5.6 million, and dividing one by the other gives that the cost per journey required to meet the repair cost is 1p, just 1 penny. The next point I would like to make is that cars make an insignificant contribution to ferry road damage compared to trucks, buses and coaches. For example, the law which is generally taken to apply to the relationship between the weight of a vehicle and the damage caused is the 4th power of the axle weight. In fact, the US General Accounting Office gives a similar conclusion, but slightly less. I estimate that to be the 3.8 ratio. So, for example, buses, which weigh of the order of 11 tons, compared to SUVs, which may weigh about 2 tons, that's a ratio of 5.5 difference between the weights. Buses cause almost 1,000 times the damage of an SUV moving along the road. The 7,000 traffic journeys per annum across the ferry are an average of about 1,900 journeys per day. This means that 2 breeds bus journeys per day cause about the same damage as all other vehicles. In January 2025, There are 26 breezer journeys daily across the ferry, 13 in one direction, 13 in the other, and about double this number in the summer months. What I would like to come to now is fairness. The company owns two assets with respect to this inquiry, the ferry and the road, and the levies charged for these should be independent. The twofold purpose of the road toll, as proposed by the company, is to pay for the road maintenance and to raise additional funds. The ferry company's desire to raise a further £50,000 concerns the viability of the company and is not directed at either ferry users or road users alone. Using the company's data for the cost of maintaining the road requires an average charge of 1p per journey, as I said just now. Factoring in the relative damage caused by heavy trucks, buses and coaches, the contribution required by cars is insignificant. I've already established that the levy being raised is on parking only, not on movement, that heavy trucks, buses and coaches don't park on the road, they drive straight through. In other words, the movement of the buses, coaches, heavy trucks will not be detected by any of the AVR cameras except those at the ferry end where they go through the toll booths. In other words, the company will know whether they paid a ferry charge for two reasons. One is they will measure them on the AVR cameras, two, they will have paid their fee. But those coming from the south won't be detected. Fairness is a theme running through the company's application and written evidence. And it requires, in the statements they have made, that the parking charge be applicable to every vehicle that parks, not just road users. Some vehicles may pay a reduced or zero parking fee, that is, those parking for less than 30 minutes or those with cars registered in BH19. But if people visiting the business is at the very end of the road, or those coming off the ferry, if those people choose to park in order to visit the internationally important Lowland Moor, the Bird's Eyes on either side of the road, or to visit Shell Bay, the beach at Shell Bay, or for any other reason, they should be paying the parking charge. So in conclusion, I'd like to say that the inquiry should not allow the road tolls proposed in the application because the basis of their application concerning the road toll is flawed. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. White. Mr. Reynolds, do you have any questions?
Yes, just a few. Good morning, Dr. White. You make the point that under the charge and the proposed scheme, vehicles could drive up and down the road all day without being charged. Are you suggesting to the inspector that anyone would realistically want to drive up and down the road all day?
Well, I don't know that they would want to drive up and down the road all day. The point I'm making is that the very fact that you could do that means that it is not, that the APNR cameras are not detecting movement.
Are you suggesting that example is a realistic example of something that is likely to happen?
It could happen, and it could very well happen that people visit the road 2 or 3 times a day. For example, if they wish to go and watch birds at different times of the day from the bird hides. There are good reasons why that could happen, but the point is the point of principle that you are not detecting movement, and therefore it would be possible to do that. Whether someone would do it or not is up to them.
But doesn't your whole thesis depend on you interpreting the word use to mean the word passage along,
Right,
when in fact the word use is not so confined?
I understand the point, and that was why I made the point when I referred to the road toll in the sense of moving along the road. What I want to establish is that what you're actually measuring is a parking charge, because that is the only way, that is the only measure that is being measured by the company for cars other than those going through the ferry. they're not measuring anything except parking. So it is a parking fee in the normal, it is de facto parking fee.
It is a fee on cars which are stationary on the road for more than 30 minutes.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
It is a
sorry.
fee. Sorry, it is a fee on cars which are toll on cars which are stationary along the sides of the road for more than 30 minutes. That's its purpose, and the reason is to exclude. Do you not agree? The reason is to exclude those accessing the ferry, given that objections were raised that people might be caught also if they were accessing nearby neighbours. So it has been designed as it has been, do you not agree? So as to address the various objections of neighbours and ferry users and locals.
It has, I agree with that, but I don't think that is the only point that matters. I think the point that matters is one of fairness, and what you are introducing is a parking fee which is only applicable to a very small proportion of the people who are using the road in any way. And you're expecting that very small group of people to contribute towards the 50, in fact you're expecting them to pay the £50,000 as was the evidence in Appendix E1, I think it is, for the spot checks. That was in order to ascertain that you were able to raise £50,000 just from that small number of people. And my point is that it would be only fair, because the company used fairness a great deal, to introduce, if you're going to introduce a parking fee, to make it be applicable to all those people who park on the road, which is a separate issue from the normal road toll.
I don't understand your point about parking on the road, surely.
The point is that you are charging a fee for a small fraction of the people who park on the road, and that it would be fair in the use of the term that the company used in order to go for road maintenance, which is a trivial or a very minute role, that it would be fair for everybody who parks on the road to be paying that parking fee that you're charging only a small fraction of the people.
I think I understand your point now, because what you're saying is that ferry users who stop on the road are not charged an additional fee for the road toll. But doesn't that whole thesis suggest that the ferry company is in fact two separate companies? It treats the road and the ferry as two separate entities without acknowledging the fact that the road would not be there if it wasn't for the ferry. The road was built to access the ferry, and so you don't acknowledge that those ferry users, in buying their ferry ticket and paying their toll, are funding the company, and the road and the ferry and all the other assets form the company's assets that they have to fund. You treat the toll, don't you, for the road and the ferry as if they're separate, siloed entities.
Indeed, I said that the ferry company, the company owns two assets. It uses the ferry, and it should charge, therefore, for the ferry, and it has a road, and the road has multiple uses. It may have been constructed in order to access the ferry, but it has developed a whole range of other purposes besides access to the ferry. It is the only way that people who are driving can get to Shell Bay who come from the south. It is really the only sensible way that people from the south can explore the site of special scientific interest on either side, the way that people can access any of the facilities that there are beside the road. And those are important facilities. Indeed, the road gave access to those. Previously, it only could do by footpath, but that is many years ago now, and it is used as much by some people for the access to the non-ferry facilities as to the facilities.
That may be so, but you don't deny that under the Act, the purpose of the road, the only reason the road was built was to access the ferry. That's correct, isn't it?
I will absolutely be happy to take your word for that it was built in order to access the ferry. The question is, then, does the use of the road for other purposes warrant a parking charge only for those people who use the road for accessing those other facilities? You're allowing the use of the road to access business premises. That wasn't in the Act, I suspect, well, you will correct me, and I much enjoyed your paper 52, which explained that for us. But it is not only the case that people who are wanting to access the facilities on either side of the road, it is the fact that people can access the business premises. Was that in the Act? The purpose has changed
Hang on a
over
second, hang on
time.
a second, you're answering the question.
So I apologize, I have a tendency to interrupt you. I do
That's
apologize.
At page 98 of the bundle, so this is just, this is,
So
yes, this
are you
is,
referring
hang on,
to,
this is paragraph 11B.
Sorry, please give the reference again.
If you're using the bundle references, page 98,
Of which bundle?
4. If you've got your written your written document in front of you, I can take you just to the paragraph number, which may be easier. It's 11B.
Page 98 of bundle 4, is that right?
That's correct.
Forgive me, I'm looking it up on my computer.
It's in front of you in hard copy.
I have it in front of me. It starts, Dear Peter. Is that right? No, it doesn't. Bundle 4, page 84?
98.
I do apologise. Yes, this is, I see, yes, thank you.
So 98, you've got that,
Yes,
and you'll see subparagraph B, it's 11B, and then subparagraph 2,
yes,
and then bullet point 3 of
yes.
that subparagraph. And you say people use the roads, go to Shell Beach, numbers coming from the Studland end, most of whom will visit one of the 3 Studland beaches, will be insignificant compared to those crossing on the ferry to visit the beach. Yes, you see that?
I do.
So would you agree that those who stop on the road, the great majority of them in that area will have come across on the ferry?
I suspect that the majority of people at the ferry end will have come from the ferry.
That's what you say, most of whom will have come across on the ferry.
Yes? I say that because if I were visiting...
Sorry, well, go ahead.
I say that because if I were visiting the Purbeck Peninsula, staying on holiday, for example, in Swanage, my tendency would be to go to one of the Studland beaches rather than the Shell Bay beach. It may not be relevant, but the majority of cars, I think, face in that direction, south to the ferry, south to Studland.
To be clear, you have a home in Studland, as you say?
I have a home in Studland.
And are you aware that those whose car is registered to BH19 or BH20 within 5 miles of South Ferry Terminal are exempt from the ferry rental?
I have read that indeed, but that isn't, I think that is not the point of this exercise. It's a dispensation you have made to people who have cars registered in BH19 only, I think, in the evidence. But that doesn't mean that the rules that you apply should just simply use that dispensation to justify something which isn't logical in the way that the development of the policy has been made.
So is your view that residence discounts or exemptions are not logical?
No, they're totally logical. They aren't relevant to the way in which you've constructed the concept of a parking charge. what you should have, because there are many people who won't have cars registered in BH19.
Well, not people whose principal residence is there will all have their cars registered there. It's an obligation to do so.
I don't have a car registered in BH19. And I know of other people who live in Studland who don't.
But you have a car and you have a home in BH19. Why is it not registered? Where is it registered?
Okay, the home that let us define what I have in Studland. My siblings and I hadn't sold the house which my parents resided in when they retired. So we own what is a holiday home in Studland. We have been coming to Studland since 1952, and the fact that doesn't apply to me, I think is not really very relevant to this account. The facts are that many people who visit the road won't have cars in BH19.
Okay, thank you very much. No further questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. White. I have no questions.
No, that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Can I now call forwards Adrian Worley? Thank you.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me okay? My name is Adrian Whaley. I'm a local resident living in Swanage. I'm also a director of a global technology research company. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. I'll keep this brief, but also will try to give a different perspective to what I've heard so far in listening to a lot of the sessions online. I'm not going to go into detail, there's been plenty of that over the last 4 days, but we'll look to give a bigger picture view of consideration by both the Inspector and the ferry company. None of what I'm going to say should reflect on the staff who run the ferry day to day. I think they do a great job in all weathers, as particularly over the last week has shown. Thank you to them. My objectives are essentially based on two things: trust and economic impact. Let me address both of those in turn. Trust. I have to say it is a bit depressing that we're sitting here once again in a public inquiry wasting taxpayers' money to determine what I think should be a very straightforward process. The reason why we're sitting here is fundamentally, I think, a lack of trust that all the stakeholders involved in this have in the ferry company, and this is getting worse, as I think is shown by the fact that this has been a longer and bigger process than I think ever before. Let me give you some examples. I'm a relatively regular user of the ferry, going up to London for business and to visit friends over the last 17 years. I know the journey well enough to be able to predict, as I get to Ringwood, whether I can make the ferry without sitting or waiting for it. Whilst I still tend to use the ferry when I leave first thing in the morning, I now rarely return on it, choosing to go round the road. It's not because I can't afford to pay the toll, it's actually because I don't want to give the ferry company any more money than I have to, as I don't trust them to use that money wisely. I know that I'm not alone in this thinking. The CEO sat here last week, but I didn't hear him putting forward any ideas to get people back on board with the ferry. And I think that trust is really, really important to the success of the ferry going forward. There is no marketing that happens, and there's no effort to increase usage from what I can see, for example, by offering lower rates at off-peak times. For the last 20 plus years, the company has justified the increases substantially based on the need to fund the replacement of the current ferry. 2 public inquiries ago established the need for the company to establish a ring-fenced ferry replacement fund. And it's good to see that that is now in place. However, once again, the ferry company has pushed out the replacement date for the ferry to 2034. In 2018, that was 2026, just 2 years from now. This has been a common theme over the past 20 years. Effectively, they're asking the ferry users to pay for the replacement fund ferry multiple times over. In recent years, there have been more frequent breakdowns of the ferries, no doubt, due to its age. The ferry company, I think, is also being left behind in the changes that are happening today. For example, the claim that it's cheaper to go across the ferry than drive round is actually no longer true if you drive an electric vehicle. It's much cheaper to go around using an electric vehicle. The ferry company has been really slow to embrace technology, and for example, where you can prepay a card, you still can't tap and go, which means that the company is incurring greater costs by having to man all of the gates. I can drive all the way down to France without stopping, but I have to stop going 300 metres across the full harbour. They're not investing to improve their return. Whilst the ferry replacement fund is so-called ring-fenced in their accounts, this is not safeguarded. And in parallel, we all know that the holding company has established an £8 billion charge against the assets of the ferry company. The asset valuation of £14 million is based on a false assumption of the land being of the same value as the residential properties on the Sandbanks Peninsula, one of the highest in the UK. And the land that the ferry owns can never be built on as it is a protected area, so to value it to this level is inaccurate at best. This valuation is significant because it is how they justify the return on investment and also how they're using the assets to establish a charge against them for use in activities in other parts of the ferry group. This provides a significant, substantial risk, I think, to the ferry business. Another part of the ferry group failed, that charge could have a very significant impact on the ferry business. The ferry company's proposal to charge for the use of the road seems to be, again, something to provoke reaction from the locals and so, again, reduce the levels of trust in them. When you look at their own projections for the revenue generated, you have to ask the question, why are they putting it forward? If it's only going to raise £50,000 per annum, and undoubtedly the cost of implementing it, having an AI NPR system is not cheap. Having a mobile one is not cheap. It has to have someone then to run it. Who's going to move it up and down the road, as was outlined last week, which was, I thought, quite interesting. That's going to cost, in my mind, more than £50,000 even just to implement it, and probably to run it, it's going to cost more than that every year. So why am I'm asking the question, I wouldn't get out of bed to increase the revenue of the organisation by 1.5%, 50k on a £3.3 million business. Why? Why is £50,000? The assertion last week was £50,000 was going to make a big difference to the ferry replacement fund. I think it's going to be a loss making what they're going to do. So I don't understand the fundamentals of why they're actually even putting that forward. Secondly, from trust, I think economic impacts. The ferry service is an essential service for the local community, providing one of only 2 main road access points into the Isle of Purbeck. Tourism is the biggest industry in this area and essential to the local population. It's also a major recreational area for Bournemouth and Port Conurbation. Despite the natural beauty of the area, the local population actually has one of the lowest average salaries in the UK, as the lawyer for the consortium laid out last week. As many jobs are low paid, seasonal in nature, or people have to commute to Bournemouth, Port and Southampton areas for their work. It is heartbreaking to hear local people talking about how they have had to give up social care jobs, for example, in Bournemouth because of the cost of travelling there, or to hear of local companies having to pay for their staff travel costs across the ferry as individuals cannot afford the tolls. It is important that the ferry provides an efficient and reasonable cost service to both locals and to the tourist industry that is a major employer in this area. The ferry is an essential service and should not be able to hold the local community and business to ransom. So I think this is the current situation and it cannot keep on going like this. We need to find a long-term solution that works for the local area, for the key industries such as tourism, and for all the stakeholders involved. And I would like to recommend that there's 4 central decisions I think need to be made. 1, a proper return on investment formula needs to be derived that isn't based on a spurious asset valuation. 2, the ownership of the road leading up to toll booths on the ferry road, I think should revert to a public highway as stipulated in the original 1923 Act of Parliament after the period of 65 years. This to then resolve any issues of access to the peninsula, which is the area of outstanding natural beauty, should be available to all. A means of safeguarding, number 3, a means of safeguarding the ferry replacement fund that's not at risk from external factors. And 4, I'd like to ask the ferry company to start marketing its services and improve its use of technology to reduce the costs and increase the usage, and also build the trust in the local community. Off-peak incentives to increase loads when capacity is available, for example, use of tap and go or AMPR technology in the right way to reduce their cost to serve and reduce bottlenecks would help to increase their turnover. Thank you for your time in taking these accounts.
Mr. Whaley, can I just ask you to clarify that first point? You read out 4, you read it out quickly.
Sorry, yeah.
Extend to that first.
So number 1 was a proper return on investment formula to be derived that isn't based on a spurious asset valuation.
Thank you very much. Mr. Reynolds, do you have questions?
Yes, I do. Good morning, Mr. Whaley. You say that the ferry has once again, tell this inquiry, pushed back the replacement date for the ferry. Okay, so you're telling the inspector that at this inquiry, the applicant has once again pushed back that date. Do you not accept that the date of 2034 replacement, 2032 order for 2034 replacement is exactly the position before the previous inquiry?
It may well be, but it's been pushed back from 2018, for example.
No, you said once again.
Yeah, because you've done it multiple times over the last 20 years. That was the point I made. If you go back through the previous times, you have multiple times moved that date.
Okay. If you could turn up, please. And you say, sorry, that the applicant has moved that date for its own financial ends. And you also say, don't you, it is running a vessel that has become uneconomic to run because it's so old. You say both of those things, don't you?
I didn't say it's uneconomic. That's your.
No, what you said was that it has been breaking down more regularly, probably because it has, because of its age. So you're putting 2 things to the inspector and asking him to accept these 2 things. The first is that the ferry company has pushed back the date, and the second is that it has now reached the stage where it is uneconomic to run. So
I didn't say uneconomic. You've said that's your word. I've not said it's uneconomic. Yeah, you have to make a business decision. It might not be as efficient to run it as a newer one. Let's be honest. If you're buying a newer ferry, it's a bit like you buy a new car today. Is the new car today not more efficient than the car you would have bought 10 years ago? Of course it is.
What you said to the inspector is that breakdowns are likely due to the age of the ferry being pushed back.
Well, probably, yes. Because
on what evidence do you rely on? What positive evidence do you rely on in relation to
any
this ferry?
Any mechanical item that you've got, you look at your car. You have a car that's 20 years old or 10 years old, whatever. It's going to be less reliable, isn't it, than the car that you just bought new. So it's not going to be as efficient. Any new car you buy today is more efficient than the car you bought 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
So you're saying that the breakdowns were due to the age of the ferry?
I said they could be. I didn't say they were.
But to be clear, you have no positive evidence other than by reference to this hypothetical car. You have no positive evidence to make that assertion, do you?
So in what, are you trying to say, well, you're justifying pushing the replacement out further because you're saying that actually it's a very reliable platform, in which case you don't need the toll increases in order to pay for the platform?
I'm not saying that.
Well,
The inspector,
you're trying to put words in my mouth.
the
So I'm trying to
inspector,
put words
the
in your
inspector
mouth.
last time heard expert evidence to that effect. So if you could turn up, please, bundle 2.
Excuse me, because I don't know what you're...
So it's going to be the smallest of the bundles, not the other one. I think it might be the one that you would just... Actually, it might be the one that right beside you, the one that the previous witness... It'll say on its spine, bundle 2, perhaps, if it is.
Yeah.
So bundle 2, page 179. So, paragraph 7.12. So the existing vessel came into service in '94. That there's a need for a replacement ferry at some point in the future is not in dispute. Whilst the estimated replacement date has changed over the years, it's a matter of fact that the ferry is now some 26 years old and is heading towards the end of its anticipated lifespan of 25 to 30 years, as suggested in 2009. An unexpected drive shaft failure in July 2019 led to wider repair and maintenance work being undertaken, the extent of which, combined with the ongoing routine major and interim refits, has extended the life of the ferry to around 2034. I have no reason to suppose that the ferry is likely to be economic to run beyond that, with likely increasingly unpredictable performance. So what the inspector accepted was that when a drive shaft failure occurred, work was done which legitimately extended the economic life of the ferry. It wasn't pushed back for some nefarious financial gain, but rather necessary work was done and that extended the life of the ferry. Do you have any positive evidence that that is wrong?
Well, I don't think it's for me to comment, to be honest, on that, because that's your,
But you have
it's your
commented.
business, it's your ferry.
But with respect, sir, you have commented?
I'm commenting on the fact that you keep moving the dates up, because you have. If you look back over the history, over the last 20 years of this, you have made justifications for when you wanted to put the ferry increases up on the basis of needing to put the ferry and replace the ferry. You know, if you said to us, look, we actually just want this in order to maintain the ferry, keep it going, and you know, we think it's going to last until 2034, 2040, whatever, you know, I think everybody would have said, fine. You know, the fact is, you're asking us each time, asking us to say, look, this is why. And that's why we sort of look at it and go, you know, that's the trust. This is why I bring up this element of trust, you know.
You went on to give the inspector evidence and ask the inspector to accept your evidence in relation to the valuation of the ferry company's assets. Are you a chartered surveyor, expert in the valuation of infrastructural assets?
No, of course not. And you have I understand, got a company to do that valuation, fine, you know. But it just doesn't, you know, you just have to look, it's a common sense thing. You look across at a piece of land and, you know, Sandbanks is one of the most expensive pieces of land in the country, as we know, for building on, when you can build a property on it.
So your personal view is that the expert chartered surveyor who gave evidence to the previous inspector, whose evidence was accepted, your view is that he was wrong and you rely on your personal opinion and common sense.
Would you be prepared to get, you know, the consortium coming up with a valuation and accept that?
I asked you a question, can you answer it?
Well, I'm just putting across
No, I asked you a
why
question.
people look at this and go, this doesn't make sense.
Okay, so you're asking this inspector to reject, say that the previous inspector got it wrong, that the expert evidence that's before the documentary form is wrong, and you're asking him to do so in reliance on hang on a second, on the evidence of Mr. Whalley, who said it's common sense.
It's Whaley, actually.
Mr. Whaley, whose evidence, his personal opinion, was that it's wrong.
Part of what this whole process is to do is for people to be able to put forward things that they look at and they go, look, this needs to be properly looked at, and this is what the inspector
But
has
what-
to take a view on, doesn't he? The inspector has to take a view of what is right, what is wrong, what maybe needs further clarification on. There's a lot of points and issues in here. You're saying the last inspector accepted the valuation. I'm not sure if they did or not, because explicitly did they say, I absolutely agree that that was the right valuation. I somehow doubt that they probably did, because in the grand scheme of all of the things that get taken into consideration,
I won't read out to you paras 7.30 through to 7.36 of the previous, 7.37 of the previous inspector's report, but I suggest that it might be wise for you to do so before you give evidence at any further inquiry. You said the road toll is going to be loss making. That was your evidence?
well, I said it could be. Because if it's going to only raise £50,000 in a year on a £3.3 million turnover business, and
So-
it's going to have costs involved in both implementing it and running it.
Yes. Have you read the rebuttal proof of evidence of Mr. King?
The robust, when was that released?
January,
Possibly not.
3rd of January.
But that was certainly the evidence that
Bundle
Mr. King
two.
gave last week, didn't seem to.
Okay, bundle 3, I suggest they're entirely consistent. Bundle 3, page 80.
Which page?
80, 80.
Okay.
So this is actually the main proof of evidence. Paragraph 66, we're not anticipating that AMPR will introduce an increase in our capital expenditures. Most enforcement companies will provide the staff and technology for approximately 7.5% of the revenue generated. And he then said in his rebuttal proof of evidence, which I can take you to, just one moment. Sorry, bear with me. Yes, sorry, page 280 of the same bundle, 280 of the same bundle, and paragraph 27. The consortium have criticised the absence of capital costs for the introduction of the AMPR system. Instead, the assumption that an enforcement company would provide the staff technology for 7.5% of revenues is questionable. However, that figure is what was stated to be likely following discussions with appropriate enforcement companies entering into a sufficiently long contract, in addition to the enforcement company being entitled to any penalty income that may be payable. The 7.5% costs are taken into account of in the calculation as to predicted overall income. As such, the road toll will be very cost effective with only a small amount of the road toll revenue being paid to the enforcement companies. Had you read that evidence before you gave evidence to the inspector today?
No, but can I ask a question then? How are they
No,
going to run
I'm
it?
asking the questions.
No, of course I haven't, because that is detailed in a section of, to be honest, there's so much information here.
Yeah.
But what you're saying on this, right, is for less than £5,000, a company is going to run an AMPR system then?
That's not, what it says is that they were willing to do so.
And 7.5%, yeah,
7.5% of revenue.
Of revenue, and
plus-
the revenue is 50k.
Plus any enforcement penalties that may be payable. That's what they have said. That's what Mr. Key's evidence is.
So they're going to run it for £3,500
Do you
plus
have
any...
do you have experience of ANPR companies and enforcement thereof? Just to be clear whether this is your personal opinion or whether you're giving the inspector any sort of informed opinion here.
I just think, if you think you're going to run this for £3,500, it's like...
So
it is hilarious, to be honest, if you think that.
Is that another personal opinion you want the inspector to see out of?
I don't need to argue with this after you on this, I'm afraid, sorry, but I'm just trying to put a bit of common sense, a bit of logic into this, because this is what's really important. You know, this is the trust. I talked about trust, and people not trusting the ferry company. When you put things in like that, I'm a businessman, I run a business. I run a multi-million-pound business, right?
Okay, sorry, do you have any experience?
Do I have experience of running a business?
This is my opportunity to ask you questions and you answer this question.
Well, also you have to ask me questions that I think are relevant to this inquiry for the inspector.
Mr. Evans, please ask the question.
You're trampling that you're a businessman of a multi-million-pound company. Do you have any experience of running an ANPR system or acquiring one? And that's simply it. Thank you very much.
Just hold on a moment, I'll just check. Nothing I need to raise with you.
Okay.
No, I think it's fine.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So can I now call forward Roger Tickle, please? If you just hold on a moment when I get to your objection on the screen.
Okay, I've got two major concerns. The first, who is the ferry for? It was formed under Act of Parliament to provide a vital link for Purbeck in general. The water hazard that is Poole Harbour means that for some journeys, the ferry cuts the distance travelled, and that's true, but not necessarily the time travelled, which is in many cases the key factor in deciding which route to take. If you arrive at the ferry to find it's already sailed, you have a 20-minute wait. In that 20-minute wait, you can drive a car quite a long way. So I think that point's already been made, so I apologise for making it again. So to be clear, the ferry was principally for the benefit of local people, providing a much needed alternative route to the one and only road to Wareham. Swanage and the Purbeck area are quite remote and not totally self-sufficient in many important areas. Hospitals, commuters, some schools and colleges, shopping, businesses, tradespeople, theatre, etc. The internet does help a lot of people, but many journeys have to be made. So we come to the increases. Cars, buses and trucks are going up 18%, or suggested to go up 18%. Passengers, bicycles, motorbikes up 75%. The one I'm concerned about is discounted bulk tickets. The discount is going down and the price increase is going up by 39%. That doesn't sound like it's for local people. It's local people who are being hit. Local people buy the bulk tickets. To me, it shows that the ferry company does not believe that locals matter. Specifically, the 39% increase for multiple tickets, which are mainly aimed at locals. Compare this to other chain ferries. There are 5 chain ferries in England, 3 of which are owned by councils, and I'll come back to that point later. The first ferry is Tor Point Ferry at Plymouth. It has a longer journey, it has a bigger usage, so it's difficult to compare completely. Their cost for crossing is £2.60. The discount is 50%, and perhaps it's the discount I'm really interested in. So we're looking to reduce our discounts considerably. That ferry has a capacity of 72. We have a capacity of 48. The next ferry is the Cowes Floating Bridge. It's not really a proper comparison. Again, it takes mainly pedestrians, and for pedestrians they provide a 50% discount. Cars cost £3 and they give a 17% discount. The next ferry is the Windermere Ferry. It has a longer journey. Cars cost £6.45 to go across, but they operate a 66% discount for bulk buying. That's also council owned. The final one is the King Harry Ferry in Cornwall. Cars are charged at £7.50. It's a smaller ferry, only carries 34. The discounts vary upwards from 50% depending on how many bulk tickets you buy. Presumably these companies all recognise the value and importance to and of local people. A lot of people boycott the ferry as their current prices make no economic sense. There has been no effort to encourage this lost trade, special winter rates, etc. Why are local people ignored? Over £10 for a daily return is not economical. Rather than decreasing the discounts for locals buying bulk tickets, the company should increase them. I'd like to emphasise this point with an interesting statistic. I've looked back at my records over the years. Unfortunately, they're old, which might mean they're not relevant, but I'd like to mention them anyway, and I'm not privy to up-to-date figures. In 2008, car journeys were 856,972. The comparison is with the years 2014, 16 and 18, and the average for those 3 years was 744,775. That's a fall of 15%, or 112,197 journeys less. Interestingly, most of the other groups of ferry users over that period increased. This fall followed a large price increase. There is justified ill feeling towards the owner of the ferry company and many people, because they believe it is overpriced, will avoid using it. Here's the thing. If you add back those missing journeys, you will be adding back over 100,000 journeys a year at, say, take a cheap rate of £4. That's over £400,000 a year, which goes straight to the bottom line. There's no additional cost for that. So that's my first point, is the local people aren't being very well catered for. If they were catered better for, if they were encouraged, if the prices were cheaper, you'll get a larger throughput. Whether that would balance out the higher cost, I don't know. But it is meant to be run for local people. The next point I'd like to make is much more fundamental. This is the fourth meeting I've attended, 2009, 14, 18 and today. All requested unnecessarily large increases in fares, greatly exceeding RPI. We're here today because we have a major dilemma. The current ferry came into service in 1994. The company wants to replace it by 2034, when the current boat will be 40 years old. The cost of a new boat has been quoted at about £17.5 million. It's an old valuation that's been increased by RPI over the years to get to that figure. It would have been nice to have had an up-to-date quote, presumably with a more modern, efficient design, quoted by several shipyards throughout Europe, perhaps the world. I don't know how far one would go. There are obviously cheaper shipyards throughout the world. It would have been nice to have had that comparison. Anyway, we're there, 17.5 million, fine. I was looking at the appendix papers, and Appendix 111 made a comment. The company made a conclusion stating we need reserves to cover unexpected events. I think this followed COVID, it followed the drive shaft breakdown, it followed the collision that delayed the return of the ferry. And it was a comment that said we need reserves to cover unexpected events. I worry about a comment like that because most people running a business should know the importance of prudence. The management should also have been very aware that they require reserves to replace their main asset. Funds should have been set aside from 1994, a sinking fund for just that event. I live in a group of flats, 20 flats. We have a company that owns a freehold. The company runs, we produce accounts annually for the 20 flats and the running of those 20 flats. Reserves at the last year end were over £40,000. 20,000 was for a sinking fund, the rest was for refurbishment and redecorations, which happen every 5 years. It is a sensible practice to do, rather than suddenly be hit with a major cost and then have to turn to everyone to pay. I make the point. So today there are far too small reserves, and the company calls for ferry users to fund a new boat over the next 10 years. Is that even fair? Prices go up for 10 years to build up the ferry replacement reserve. So does that mean in 10 years prices will go down? Prices never go down. It is only fair that the cost should have been spread over a much longer period. Again, I asked the question, is raising cash the only way to fund a new boat? Are there other methods? Leasing, paying in instalments? We don't have alternatives. Perhaps we should have had alternatives. The company states it cannot continue without these increases. Well, it can. First, the current average profit before tax is over £600,000 a year, based on a turnover of 3.3 million, which is excellent, and in fact reflects that prices are already too high. The ferry link is vital. The mismanagement and lack of philanthropic philosophy is no longer acceptable. An owner who lives in Essex and who has other businesses that require his attention and who uses the profitable ferry company as a guarantor for loans for his other companies and who sees the ferry company as a cash cow is surely not in the local interest. It is time the local councils reacted and used the Ferries Acquisition by Local Authorities Act 1919 to resolve this fundamental dilemma. There should be a complete review of what is the best solution for the region's transport infrastructure and how best to achieve it. Helping safeguard the economic well-being of Purbeck and the long-term future of the ferry. Does the Ministry of Transport have the energy and will to make this happen? It has the expertise and example of the Tor Point ferry near Plymouth and other types also owned by councils. Once owned by an alliance of local councils, I would anticipate the ferry being run for the local community, aiming for tolls to cover the future running costs. I believe run by local interests at a fair price will significantly increase local usage. There may not be appetite to take this fundamental change now, in which case the ferry will stumble on as it has for the last 20 years, providing local communities with very little and local businesses with uncertainty. It will make a lot of money for one man and an expensive service for the general public. A poor result.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sibley. Mr. Reynolds? No, thank you. No. Okay. Mr. Sibley, can I just ask, can you tell me where generally you do live, without being too specific?
Sorry, where?
Where do you live?
Swanage.
In Swanage. And have you lived there long?
17, 18 years, yeah.
And what about your usage of the ferry? Do you use it regularly?
I used to lose it. I've sort of fully retired now. I used to use it quite a lot, going a certain route. Depends on the route always. Bournemouth, Southampton, London, it's an easier road to use. It's also, as we can see, it's a beautiful route. The joy of just driving along and taking the time and enjoying the view, even if you miss the ferry, is wonderful. That said, but for convenience, now I pretty much don't use the ferry because I can get the pool just as quickly, especially if I miss the ferry.
Okay, that's all I wanted.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So it's now 11 o'clock. I think rather than moving on to Chris Nicholson now, I suggest we take a break, 15 minutes, come back. Okay. So we'll adjourn now and come back at 11:15.